Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing only my personal stories, or as I like to call them, the Real Rockford Files. Let's get into it. Today's episode is going to be a large compilation of all paranormal encounters I have ever experienced in my life that I can remember, or at least as many as I can fit into one video. The first story happened before I was born and was told to me by my late parents, and they weren't the type to make up stories. It was 1982. I believe my oldest brother, Aaron, wasn't even 1 year old yet. He was at that stage where he can already pull himself up on his feet and stand at the side of his crib and would try to talk that baby gibberish that has no actual words but sounds like a full conversation. At the time, they lived in a trailer, just the three of them. The trailer had two doors, both on the same side, but the farthest one didn't have a porch, so it wasn't used and kept locked with a normal lock and a chain lock. Inside the house, my brother's crib was in the room next to my parents and right up against the door with no porch. Not the best place for a baby, but I digress. It was nighttime. My brother had been put to bed, lights out, and my parents were in their room. After a few minutes, they heard my brother talking that baby gibberish, and very loudly. He was having a very animated conversation with... That's when they thought, who's he talking to? My dad went into the room, flipped on the light, and my brother was standing facing the door that led outside and kept on talking. I imagine his blood ran cold when he noticed the door was open, just a crack because that's all the chain lock would allow. He grabbed my brother and closed and relocked the door. Could have been a prowler or kidnapper, but what makes me believe it was something else was the fact that my dad didn't hear anyone move away from the trailer. The ground around the trailer was all gravel and rocks, and makes a lot of noise when walked on. Not a sound. Fast forward a few years, and my parents would have 3 kids now. My brother Aaron, Sean, and me. I'm somewhere between 3 and 5 years old at this time. We lived in the Jane Addams projects in Rockford, right next to the Rock River. It was right around the time the My Buddy dolls were on TV all the time. For those who don't know, a My Buddy doll was basically the inspiration for Chucky from Child's Play. Well, this commercial song got burned into my wee little brain, and I had to have one. My parents noticed me singing the song constantly and got me a My Buddy. The first day I'm home with it, I was in the living room and my parents were in the kitchen. I walked into the kitchen with a look of disbelief on my face, something my parents didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't react. My mom asked me, "What's his name?" referring to the doll. I then said with a confused look on my face, "He said his name is Baby Bobby." Again, my parents didn't pick up on my wording and just assumed I named him that. But what they didn't know is that just before I walked into the kitchen, I was playing with my doll. I grabbed his hand and said, "What's your name, buddy?" Then he answered, "Baby Bobby." That's when I went into the kitchen. Well, being a little kid, I quickly forgot how scared I got when Baby Bobby told me his name and continued to play with him. Over the next week, Baby Bobby would talk to me every time we were alone. I can't recall what about, random kid stuff that Baby Bobby seemed to bring up. I guess my parents paid more attention than I thought, because they definitely noticed this and were disturbed by it. I wondered if they heard Baby Bobby talk too. Either way, one day I awake to find Baby Bobby is gone. My parents threw him away and told me they killed Baby Bobby. Forgive my parents, they thought telling me that was funny. Regardless, my doll was gone. I didn't know how to feel about it, a little mad and a little relieved at the same time. A few days go by, and I'm walking down the basement stairs to rummage through our boxes looking for treasure. Got about 5 feet from the steps in the basement and felt like I should look behind me, so I did. Our basement steps have about half a foot gap between each step so you can see under the stairs. And what do I see peeking through one of those gaps? Baby Bobby. I ran over, brushed basement dirt off them, and ran upstairs to show my parents. The look on their faces when I came into the kitchen holding that doll, yelling, "Baby Bobby came back! He came back!" That was truly the last time I see that doll. My parents took it and got rid of it for good. I don't know exactly what they did with it, but I think they threw him in the river. The reason I think this is a recurring dream I had for a while after that, where I'm standing on the bridge over the river, and I throw Baby Bobby in, then watch him sink. The next story takes place quite a few years later. A few house moves later, in 95 or 96, my parents would now have 5 kids aged 3 to 13, from eldest to youngest, Aaron, Sean, myself, Christopher, and Daniel, and soon to be 6 with my mother pregnant with my newest brother Michael. Also, this story I believe to be not so paranormal as it was a mean, horribly cruel prank. My mother would go into labor more than 3 weeks early, and my brother Michael was born prematurely. He stayed in the ICU for 3 days with a machine to help him breathe. On the 3rd day, the doctors, without asking my parents first, decided they wanted to unhook the machine to see if Michael's lungs were strong enough to breathe on his own. Turns out they weren't strong enough, and they couldn't revive him. So less than a week into Michael's life, and a funeral for him is being arranged. This is where the maybe paranormal, maybe prank happens. The week leading to the funeral, and a few days after, we kept getting a phone call. My mom was the first to answer, and when she started crying and hung up, we all took turns answering and cussing out whoever was on the other end, telling them to stop calling. It was the same thing every time. When I'd answer, I'd hear music, the kind that plays from those little wind-up music boxes, accompanied by a baby crying. It was heartbreaking and rage-inducing to think someone would do this after the baby died. The next story wouldn't happen until 97 or 98. I'd have another brother added to the bunch, Colton, born in 97, so now there's 6 of us living, 7 plus our dead brother Michael. We lived in a different place. Now we're in a duplex on South 3rd Street. And one day, just random occurrence, never happened before or never happened again, I was in the house alone, and I walked in through the living room into the front bedroom. I opened up the door, and there's a light fixture on the inside of the door, just to the right. And I take one step in the room, and that light dims, like if it had one of those knobs you turn to dim the lights, but there's not one of those, it's a regular switch. That light goes out, and immediately there's a light in the corner of the room. And when the light in the corner of the room gets brighter, I can see it's a street lamp. And as soon as it's bright enough, the entire room is just gone, and I'm standing on a street corner. And there's dead bodies all over the ground, or they look like they're decrepit and pieces missing. They start crawling towards me, and I blinked, and I was back in my room. Really weird, never happened again. My next haunting wouldn't occur until almost a decade later. It was the year 2005, and my girlfriend was pregnant with my son, Jaden. And we'd spend the night at her house, then we'd spend the night at my house, go back and forth. And after she was pregnant, a couple of different times, we'd be sleeping, it'd be nighttime, pitch black in her room, every light's turned off, no night light plugged into no walls, so it's pitch black. And the radio would turn itself on and crank the music all the way up. Now, when this happens in the middle of the night, it's terrifying. First time it happened, I got up and I wasn't sure I wanted to even go near the stereo, but somebody had to turn it off. So some time goes by, and my girlfriend's grandmother dies. I don't know if this plays into the hauntings, but I think she might have tried to contact me. Now, a couple of weeks leading up to the baby being born, I thought I heard some weird things, saw shadows, and then when my son was born, even more weird stuff started happening. The radio would still turn itself on and crank the music all the way up, which was really bad when you're trying to keep your baby asleep. And one night, while everybody was sleeping, I went outside the front door to smoke a cigarette outside because I was not smoking around my baby at the time. And I'm still in a hallway, an enclosed porch where the stairs go down to another door that leads outside. And I'm sitting there at the top steps, smoking my cigarette, and it's kind of dark in there, only really street lights shining in. And all of a sudden at the bottom of the steps, I see an orb of light just materialize out of nowhere. It's nearly the size of a basketball, and it's just floating there about mid-chest height. and I'm looking at it, and I'm holding my cigarette, and I'm getting ready to freak out. Then it starts moving towards me, coming up the stairs. It would lift up and come down. It would lift up and then come down, just like somebody who's walking up the stairs. Well, it got about halfway up the steps, and I dropped my cigarette, ran inside, and closed the door. Immediately, I regretted what I was going to have to do, because I couldn't let that cigarette sit on the carpet out there and burn a hole in it. So I opened the door, grabbed it, and put it out. Thankfully, whatever it was gone. Fast forward a couple more days, me and my girlfriend are in the kitchen, baby's asleep in the bedroom, which is 2 rooms away. The door's closed, and there's baby monitor in there with him, and we have the receiver in the kitchen with us. And as we're sitting there, we start hearing what sounds like a woman talking. We both lean a little bit closer to the baby monitor to be sure what we're hearing. Can't tell what they're saying, but it's definitely a woman speaking. And then as soon as we come to the realization that we're hearing a voice coming from that room, my baby, Jaden, starts screaming. The most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard a baby ever scream. We looked at each other with eyes wide, and I hated that I had to be the one to go in first, but I wasn't about to let something hurt my baby. So I ran into the room. Nothing there. He's sound asleep, like he was never awake to begin with. That was one of the worst things that I've ever gone through. I'm going to rest my stories here for now. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.